Last Friday night, a neighbor of mine was making a Shalom Zacher to celebrate the birth of a grandson. I walked over, I said Mazel Tov, and I have enough trouble, thank God, keeping track of my own family. Tough to keep track of the families of a lot of other people. So I said to him, "Is this your first grandson?" And he said to me, "No, this is my son." Now granted, he's in his mid-40s. He's got a very large family. It was possible for him to be a grandfather, but it was a little embarrassing. I felt like a bit of a knucklehead. You make a mistake about someone else's children, it's a little embarrassing. Maybe you feel like a fool. But if you make a mistake about something that's important to your children, that can be devastating. Let's talk about raising children and believing in them and boosting them. First, understand, your children, better than anyone in the world, are great at determining what is important to you. King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest man who ever lived, told us in Mishlei and Proverbs that Ish Lefi Mahalalo. You want to judge a person? Look at the praises that he receives from other people. Ish, a person, Lefi Mahalalo, according to his praises. Ask around. Hey, what's that person like? What's that fellow like? What's that woman like? Hopefully you won't get any lashon hara. Hopefully you'll have nice things said, and you can get a sense from the nice things that are said what that person's like. A later commentator, Rabbeinu Yonah, says that is not what Shlomo HaMelech means. Here is what he means. He means you want to get the measure of a man or a woman, look at what they praise. Don't look at the praises that they receive from other people. They can fool other people. Look at what's important to them. Look at their priorities, and then you'll have a sense of what that person is like. I was in an airport once, and a fellow walked by wearing a t-shirt. And granted, it was one of those joke shirts. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it, but it stopped me in my tracks. The shirt said, husband, father, fantasy football legend. Let's review that. He's a husband because he got married. Wonderful, he met a woman, they got married. Okay, not that big a deal apparently to him. He's just a husband. Not a great husband, not a devoted husband, just husband. And then they had a child, or children. So he became a father. Not doting father, loving father, incredible father, super dad, just plain old father. But when it comes to something that he really, really is serious about, passionate about, fantasy football, now he's not just a fantasy football player. He's not just an entrant in a fantasy football tournament. Doesn't just have a team. He's not just a captain. He's a legend. Now granted, he's joking, but what's he telling the world? He's walking around telling the world that he takes fantasy football more seriously than he takes his job, his role as a husband and as a father. We've got to be awfully careful because kids see that. They want to know what your priorities are. They want to know, for example, nowadays, at a minimum, that you love them more than you love your phone. Now you'll laugh and you'll say, come on, of course my kid knows that I love him or her more than my phone. But if you're spending waking moment after waking moment looking at your phone and looking at your phone and looking at your phone, even while they're talking, especially when they're young, it's awfully tough to disabuse them of the notion that you love your phone more than you love them. I remember when one of my youngest children was about 2 years old or so, maybe 3 years old, and was telling me one of these shaggy dog little kid stories. No beginning, no middle, no end. They're just going on and on and on. And I'm looking at my phone and I'm multitasking because of course I can check the score in a game or read an email or a tweet or a WhatsApp message while listening to a little kid's story. So I'm looking at the phone and he's telling me the story and I'm saying, yeah, and then at one point he reaches forward, grabs my chin and turns it so that I'd be facing him. I'm saying, yeah, but I'm not looking at him. I'm looking at the phone. So I'm telegraphing to him. The phone, at least right now, and for some of us, almost always, is more important than you, because that's where my attention's focused, rather than on you. I'll tell you another story. Years ago, we were living in a house that we had outgrown. Thank God our family was growing. And so we bought a house up the block, we renovated it, and I was very excited, very proud of myself that rather than having the contractor build a deck and then figuring out what size sukkah could fit on the deck, instead we chose what size sukkah we'd like and then had the deck made to accommodate that sukkah. Hey, good thinking, right? So I was very excited about this. And so while they were doing the construction, it was right around or just before Sukkot's time. And so I went to say goodnight to my two daughters, who at the time were probably 10 and 8, something like that. And I said, girls, this year we're going to be on our sukkah outside at our home. But next year, where are we going to be for Sukkot? Meaning, we're going to be in our new home, in our new sukkah. And in unison, without missing a beat, they both said to me, in Yerushalayim. Of course, because that's what we say. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, not next year up the block in our new house. That's what I was dreaming about. That was my goal. That's what I was yearning for, to be in our new house in New Jersey rather than in Jerusalem. Kids see that and they note that. Another story. I was at a Philadelphia Eagles game. I'm from Philly, big fan of the Eagles. So are my kids, except for one. We still like him most days. A little tough during football season. But I'm at the Eagles game with one of my sons who's a huge Eagles fan, like me, and the Eagles are about to lose. And then there's a freak play right at the end of the game. They block a field goal, another player catches it, runs it the length of the field for a touchdown, and we are going nuts. My son and I are slapping five and fist bumping and hugging each other and hugging strangers. Unbelievably exciting game. We come home, and my son is telling my wife about how exciting the game is, and later that night, my wife says to me, sounds like a exciting game. I said, yeah, it was. It sounds like you were going crazy. I said, yeah, I wasn't necessarily going crazy, but I was, yes, at least mildly enthusiastic about the last second incredible ending, and they won. She says, look, that's great. I just want to point out that you were there with our son, and Sukkot is around the corner, and then Simchas Torah at the end of Sukkot. So I just want to point out that I know you don't really love the dancing with the Torah, but your son's going to be there, our son's going to be there, and if he sees you not dancing with the Torah after having seen you jumping up and down with joy at the Eagles game, I don't know, it might send the wrong message. And she was right. Can you think of a worse message to a child? Jumping up and down with reckless abandon, with unrestrained glee because your football team scored a touchdown or won a game? Yeah. I'm not saying that's not a big deal. I'm a sports fan. It's a big deal to me too. But compared to dancing with the Torah on Simchas Torah, how do you even have them in the same conversation? And so if you show more passion at the game than you do for dancing with the Torah, you're sending a message to your children, and they will pick up on that message. It's an indelible message that they won't soon forget. The next thing that's important to realize is that every child has a wish list. And there are 3 things at the very top of that wish list. Number 1 is you, their parent. Number 2 is you, their parent. And number 3, you'll be shocked to hear this, is you, their parent. That's what they want. They want you. They don't want a souvenir. I have a relative, quite a few years younger than me, I don't know, 15, 20 years younger. He came up to me and he said, got to tell you this story. I got legend seats offered to me for the Yankees, and I gave them up because of you. Now, to understand the story, you need to know what legend seats are. Legends seats at the Yankees game is the greatest hookup that you can get at a professional sporting event that I know of, other than perhaps sitting with the owner in his private box. They're the seats right there, right off the field, and they include unlimited food and drink, including gourmet kosher food. You get tickets, legend seats, even if you're not a Yankees fan, even if you're a Yankees hater, you grabbed them. And so he's telling me that he passed them up because of me. I said, wait, why would you pass up legend seats because of me? If I got an offer of legend seats, I would typically grab them. He says, you don't remember what you told me when I got married and then when I had my first child? I said, I don't. You have to remind me. He said, I'll tell you what you told me. And so here's what I had told him. He reminded me of this. I told him that perhaps my biggest regret in life is how I acted when I was younger, raising my kids. When my oldest son was born, I was a 24-year-old hothead. I wasn't just an inexperienced parent, I was a brand new parent, and there was no owner's manual. I looked for one, didn't come with one. By the time my youngest child was born, I was 42. Very different, completely different person, because I'd worked very hard at that role. I didn't just want to be father and be a legend or be great at something else. I wanted to be great at being a father. And I've lost track of the number of times where my older kids will say to me, when we were that age, we never used to, or you never let us. And it's usually something more lenient, because I've grown, I've matured as a parent. And so when I explained to him my regret was back when I was a young lawyer working very, very long hours, most nights I wasn't able to see my children. But every once in a while, I'd get an invite. Somebody would call me up because they had legend seats at the Yankees game, or courtside, or a suite at the Knicks game, or the Rangers game, or something like that. And I'd call home and tell my wife that I'm going to be home late as usual because, not because I'm working late, but because I got legend seats. And so I'd take away a night where if I was able to get out of the office to go to the game, I could have gotten out of the office to go see my kids. And I didn't. And I went to a game instead. I don't do that any longer. If I'm at a game, almost always, unless there is a compelling business-related reason to be at that game without my kids, if I'm at a game, I'm there with my kids. If I get offered the tickets and it means I'm going to miss my kids that night, I say thank you very much and give them to someone else. And so that's what this young father was telling me. He said, I got offered the legend seats and I gave them up because you told me I'm working hard, I'm working long hours. If I could take off a night, I should take off that night, but I should go home and see my kids an extra night, not go to the Yankees and sit in the legend seats. A few years ago, the aforementioned Philadelphia Eagles, for whom I root, had quite a run in the playoffs. They beat the Atlanta Falcons in the divisional round of the playoffs, and so that meant they were going to play the Vikings in the conference championship. Whoever wins that game is going to the Super Bowl. I was in Israel when they beat the Falcons, celebrating the birth of a grandchild, thank God. And I called home to speak to my teenage son because I knew he wants to know one thing. Are we going to the Eagles-Vikings game? This is the biggest deal in the world for him. He's about 16 years old at the time, and the Eagles are going to the NFC Conference Championship. And so I call home and I say to him, listen, I know you're going to be upset about this, but just hear me out. I can't take you to the game. I've been in Israel for a week. I'm returning the morning of the game. It's not fair to the other kids who I haven't seen in a week plus while away. I can't just come in and say hello and goodbye and disappear and go to the game. So I know you're going to be upset, but don't worry. I spoke to my brother, and your uncle's taking you to the game. You're going to get to go to the game. And I figured he's going to say, whew, that was a close call. I thought you were telling me that I can't go to the game. Thank God I get to go to the game. I don't know if he would have said thank God, but he would have been thankful that he gets to go to the game. And instead he said, but Dad, I want to go to the game with you. He didn't just want to go to the game. He wanted to go to the game with me. He went to the game, they won, and they made it to the Super Bowl. And they won the Super Bowl. And it was pretty exciting as a longtime Eagles fan. All I said for years was that I wanted them to win once. I'm not a hog, not a chazer as we would say. I don't need multiple championships, just once in my lifetime. And they did it, and it was exciting. But I was not feeling well. Just the day of the game, I was under the weather. Watched it anyway with my family. And when they won, I hugged my son. And a day or so later, I found out that I had the flu. And then a day or two after that, we found out that he had the flu. And I went in to see him while he was sick. And I said, I feel so bad. I never should have hugged you. Even at the game, while watching it, I felt that I wasn't feeling great. And I should have been more sensible. Should not have hugged you. And he looked at me while sick with a high temperature with the flu. And he said, it was worth it. It was worth it. He's telling me, 16-year-old boy, that it was worth it to get the flu. To hug his dad? It took a lot of work. A lot of work. Work that I didn't do, or didn't do as well with my older children. Worked hard with the younger ones. It's not something that can happen in a day. It's something that takes a lot of time of building that trust, of showing them how much you love them and how important they are. That you love them more than, and that they're even more important than your phone. Not easy. I have a friend whose wife lost her father. Father was very well known. And after the Shiva, she told her husband it was so beautiful to see all those people who came to visit. Some I knew, some I didn't know. And so many of them told me what an incredible impact my father had on their lives. It was just heartwarming. It was amazing. I knew that he was important, but I didn't realize just how much of an effect he had on people's lives. And then she paused and she said, but I just couldn't help but wonder, where was he when I needed him? You do not ever want one of your kids to ask that question after you go. They need you, and they need you to believe in them. And if you don't believe in them, they'll find someone else who will. And chances are you will not like that person or that philosophy or what they're selling or pushing or giving. They need you to believe in them, not someone else. There's a hint to that concept in the Torah. We see that after Yitzchak tells Esav, his son, to go prepare food so that he can give him a blessing, and Rivka, Yitzchak's wife, tells Yaakov to pretend that he's Esav so he can get the blessing, which he desperately needs for the future of the Jewish people, the blessing of physical prosperity. And then after Yaakov takes that blessing and runs away, escapes just narrowly before Esav enters the room, and Esav's very upset when he hears what has happened. And so Rivka overhears Esav's plans. He's making plans to estrange himself, distance himself from his twin brother Yaakov, and then to kill him. And so Rivka tells Yitzchak, her husband, I think we should send our son Yaakov away. Let's send him away. We could send him to my brother. He can get married. And Yitzchak agrees and tells him to go to Lavan, his wife's brother, Yitzchak's brother-in-law, so that he can find a wife. Wonderful. But isn't that weird? Parents overhear that one child wants to kill another one. Shouldn't they keep the potential victim at home, stand in front of him, hide them behind each of them, and send away the would-be murderer? Send him away as far as possible. I don't know where. Sing Sing, Alcatraz, the Amazonian rainforest, somewhere, anywhere but home. And instead, they send away Yaakov, the one who's the potential victim? And the answer I heard once, the Torah is shouting this out to us, is that Rivka realized, and Yitzchak realized, Yaakov will be okay on his own. Esav needs his dad. The only person in the world who understands him. That's the person with whom he had an incredibly close relationship. Esav needs his dad. Esav, the would-be murderer, needs his dad. He stays home in the house. Yaakov, go find a job. Go find a wife. You'll be all right outside the house. Similarly, the Medrash tells us that after Yosef was sold as a slave, his new slave masters passed by Beit Lechem, where his mother was buried. Yosef pulled himself away from them and ran and hurled himself on top of his mother's grave. Kever Rachel, Mama Rachel. And he was screaming like nobody has screamed before or since at that grave. Mother, Mom, my brothers sold me. They sold me as a slave. I'm all alone. How can this happen? How could they do this to me? And he's wailing and crying all of his strength until he just collapses on top of her gravestone, on top of her grave. And he hears a voice. It's his mother's voice. I don't know how this happened, but this is what the Medrash tells us. And his mother's voice tells him, it's okay. You'll be all right. I'll be with you, watching over you. God will be with you, watching over you. Get up, go with them, you'll be okay. And he pulls himself up and he goes to Egypt. And then later, when he faces about as strong a temptation as anyone has ever faced, great looking Jewish guy, like every Jewish guy, devastatingly handsome. And his master's wife is importuning him, trying to seduce him every single day. Talmud tells us that she was the most beautiful woman in the world and would change her clothes multiple times every day. And she did not hint. She was very direct in what her intentions were. Every day, lie with me. And on that fateful day, when according to at least one commentator, he just couldn't handle it anymore, and he was planning to give in, and he saw his father's reflection. They had a conversation. Don't ask me how that happened either. But they had some sort of conversation. Did he imagine it? Did he assume that's what his father had said? Or would have said? But they had a back and forth. And it was his father's image that gave him the resolve to run away, to not commit the sin. Leaving his garment in her hand, she used it to frame him. He ended up in the dungeon, but he resisted that temptation. He succeeded. The master of self-restraint became the leader of Egypt, paved the way for the Jews to come down, at least initially, peacefully, and carved out an area for them in Goshen, a yeshiva for them, place for them and their families. He was able to succeed because he knew that not only God, but his father and his mother believed in him. They had his back, even from afar. But it's not just from afar. It's even in the afterlife. One of my sons was on a summer trip where they traveled to different destinations. And so they're in Yosemite, and they stop to pray the afternoon service, the daven mincha. And a guy with a big backpack walks up to the group and says, "Who's in charge?" And they point out the rabbi who's in charge of the trip. And he comes over and he says, "Rabbi, are you about to pray?" He says, "Yes." He says, "I'm Jewish. Can I join you?" The rabbi says, "Of course." He says, "Well, when you finish praying, can I say Kaddish?" He says, "Of course." He says, "Thank you." He says Kaddish and explains to the rabbi afterwards the following, that he had booked this hike months and months in advance. It's only a certain number of passes that are given out for people to hike and to stay in the park, I guess, camping outdoors. And so he got one of these passes, and as a hiking enthusiast, didn't want to give it up. He went to sleep the night before, and his father appeared to him in a dream. His father said, "It's my yurtzeit tonight. Aren't you going to say Kaddish? Tonight, tomorrow?" And he replied to his father in the dream, "I feel terrible, but I'm in Yosemite. How am I going to find a minyan to say Kaddish? I feel so bad that I didn't look at the calendar. I messed up. Usually I check it. I don't know how I missed it. I didn't realize that today was the Hebrew day. I'm not observant." And his father, in the dream, said to him, "If I find you a minyan, will you say Kaddish?" He said, "Of course." Now, how in the world is this guy going to find a minyan in Yosemite? When you're in Yosemite, you can't just go on godaven.com and find out when's the next mincha minyan in front of El Capitan or in front of Half Dome. That doesn't happen. What are the chances that this guy is going to be in the exact place where a group of observant Shomer Shabbos boys and their rabbi and counselors are about to start praying mincha? Statistically, it is ludicrously improbable. But if you've got a father up there in heaven, a father who believes in you, a father who created a bond while he was still down here, that probably gives him some protectia to go to God and say, "God, you heard him in the dream. He's willing to say Kaddish. You just need a minyan. You think you can make that happen?" And I imagine God saying, "I got this. I can make that happen." And we see, and I'll finish with this, that King David, after the horrific, terrible rebellion of his son Absalom against him, gives an order to his general, "Don't kill my son. But he's rebelling against you. He's still my son. Don't kill him." And his general disregards the order and kills Absalom. And David HaMelech gets the news, and he is heartbroken. He is inconsolable. He's crying, he's yelling, "Avshalom, b'ni, b'ni Avshalom, Avshalom, my son, my son, my son Avshalom, Avshalom, my son, my son." And each one of those mentions of my son, sages tell us, was taking Avshalom, reaching down into Gehenna, reaching down into hell, whatever construct that is, whatever that means. And I'm not sure how David HaMelech was able to do this, but he did. Reach down into the 7th level of Gehenna and pulled his son up to the 6th. And then the 5th, my son, to the 4th, my son, the 3rd, the 2nd, the 1st, and then with the last one, put him up in heaven. Why? Because a parent has to be willing to reach into hell to save a child. Let's never let it get to that. Let's build our children up from the youngest of ages. Show them how important they are. Show them how much we love them. Tell them that and show them that. And show them that they are our highest priority. Not our phone, not our fantasy football league, not our team, not our hobby. Them, our boys and our girls and our grandsons and our granddaughters. Believe in them, because if you don't, someone else will.